Hello everybody, it is 3:30, which of course means it is time for one of our formerly after school, now just called Headwaters Science Center STEM shows, because of course school is out now, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to call it after school STEM. These are shows that we do every single day at 3:30. We have been doing them for the better part of 8 months now. And the gist of it is one of the educators here at the Headwaters Science Center goes live across a few different platforms online. So for our live audience here, make note, we are recording this, so might get picked up on the microphone. If I have you come up in front here, you will be on camera, just so you guys know. And for our internet audience, there is a little bit of a live crowd here, so if I'm addressing something off screen, there might be moments when I'm not completely visible to you. Don't panic, it's part of the plan. And like I said, the gist of it is one of our educators here goes live and we talk about some kind of sciencey topic. We do some sort of demonstration, try and mix it up, use different educators talking about different topics. And what we're going to be doing today is doing kind of a sample of one of our field trip demos that we do, one of our outreach programs that we do called Pushes and Pulls. And so this is a program that, because of COVID, I really haven't had a chance to do a whole lot of lately. So a big part of why I wanted to do this one is because I haven't really had a chance to do it lately, and I want to get back into the swing of things so that as we're starting to do more and more demos, now that, COVID stuff's kind of loosening up, I'll be a little bit more in practice for it. And so, benefit for you guys, you get a nice show. Benefit for me is, like I said, I'm getting some practice with some material I haven't worked with for a little while. And so, the Pushes and Pulls demo, what it's basically about is, right in the name there, pushes and pulls. And pushes and pulls are the forces that basically make every single thing around us, kind of at any scale, at any level, work. Nothing happens in this universe without some sort of push or pull happening. So, start you off with a pretty basic example, something that I'm sure all of you can predict, all of you have witnessed in your own life. I have here a fork. I'm going to hold this fork up. What's going to happen when I let go of this fork? What do you think? Want to hold the fork up? All right. And so, when he lets go of the fork, what do you think is going to happen? Now let's try it.
Fall.
Beautiful.
Fall.
Not so hard, right? I'm not going to ask you any real stumper questions here. As I said, what we're talking about here are things that I'm sure most of you have seen and observed in your everyday life. You hold something up, you drop it, it falls. Question is why? How? What makes that fall? Gravity. Love it. What is gravity? So we know gravity makes things fall. We know if I hold a thing up here, it goes down to here. And so gravity is a force, we call it a pull, that is pulling things where? Yep, to the ground, to the earth, down. And down, I heard someone over here say, is usually the answer I hear from that. I heard some other answers over here that are a little bit more correct, but I want to address the idea of down here for a second. So a lot of times when I say this, you say, yeah, the fork falls down. But what is down? So, conveniently, I have a little globe here. And also conveniently, this globe doesn't have Bemidji on it, but it does have a Grand Rapids, which is pretty close. Also insane that this globe has Grand Rapids, Minnesota on it. We're right here. So I dropped that fork, and where did that fork go? It went down, but what direction relative to this globe? It went from here to where? Yeah, went this way. It went down to here. Okay, I'll tell you. For a couple years ago, I lived in a country called New Zealand. And New Zealand is all the way over here, about as far away to the opposite side of the planet as you can get. And notably, kind of on a different angle there when we're orienting this way. And what do you suppose happened when I dropped a fork in New Zealand? Where do you suppose it went? You think it still went that way? No. You think it did still went that way? You think when I dropped a fork in New Zealand, it flew off into space? No, of course not. I dropped a fork in New Zealand, it still fell onto the floor. And the floor is facing the opposite direction there. So down is kind of interesting because, like I said, when we think of down, what we think of is kind of where gravity takes things. But where gravity is actually taking things is towards the center of the Earth. It's taking it towards the center of mass. So what gravity does is it pulls objects, any object that has mass together. Anything that has a mass has a gravitational force to it. There is some small force that is drawing all of you to me. There's some force that is drawing this ball to you there in the back. There's a gravitational force between all of us. Most of them are just too small for it to really make a difference in the grand scheme of things, compared to the giant gravitational force that we have underneath us all the time in the Earth. And the Earth is subject to these forces too. So, I have a little model here. We have our Earth, I have a rope, and I'm going to start spinning this. And as you guys probably know, our Earth is spinning out in space. And the reason our Earth is spinning is because of gravity. And what do you suppose is the object, the mass that our Earth is kind of most subject to when it comes to gravity? What is the object that is having the most influence on our planet, gravitational-wise? What makes it spin around like this? The Earth, okay. That's what we're talking about here. Phrase it a different way. In our model that I am right here, what would my head be in this model? The sun, exactly. So basically, objects of bigger mass are going to exert a bigger gravitational pull. And so the sun is the biggest thing we have in our neighborhood of the universe. And so the sun is the thing that all the smaller things kind of orbit around. And then bigger things exert their force on smaller things around them. So like we have the moon. The moon orbits around us because we're bigger than the moon. We orbit around the sun because the sun's bigger than we are. What do you suppose would happen if the sun all of a sudden just disappeared? Like we're orbiting around the Earth like we always do, or orbiting around the sun like we always do, and all of a sudden the sun's not there. What do you think would happen to our orbit? Where do you think the Earth would go? You think we'd keep spinning? No. Where do you think we'd go? Would we stop moving at all? Okay, well, like I said, in this model, really I said my head is the sun, but really my wrist here is the sun. So, let's illustrate this. The sun goes away, and I threw my ball into the front row. The sun suddenly disappeared, the Earth goes speeding off whichever direction it was. And that is a good illustration of the first law that a man named Isaac Newton came up with. And Isaac Newton's probably a guy you've heard of, probably seen before. We have, until relatively recently, had two salamanders on the floor named after him. They have unfortunately passed away, but a man that we here have honored in certain ways as well. And Isaac Newton is an English guy. He came up with a lot of these kind of basic laws of gravity that we still use to this day and kind of are really able to observe in our everyday life all the time. And so we came up with three of them that I have kind of briefly written on the back there. And I said this is very illustrative of the first law. An object in motion stays in motion, an object in rest stays at rest. And there's one more little sentence I like to tack on at the end there, which is, they're in the basic one too, but unless acted upon by some other force. And so, you can think of this as, like I said, the Earth. If the force that is keeping the Earth rotating around the sun suddenly disappears, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop moving because it's already moving. There has to be something to actually stop it. And so without that force there, something to block it from moving, it's just going to keep going. It just kind of loses the thing that was giving it direction before. And you can think about this even, like I said, in basically everyday life. You can set that fork there. Is that fork going to start moving on me? No, not unless I move it. And once I move it, it does stop eventually, interestingly enough. Can we think of any reason why when I do start the fork moving, it eventually stops? Because it slows down. Why does it slow down? Friction is a word I heard over here. Friction's a great word here, and that's part of it. So friction, again, one of those things that I'm sure we've all observed in our everyday life, is the tendency, basically, for when stuff rubs together, some force is lost. Like it's an inefficiency, it's a waste product. And so you can kind of experience this with yourself. You take your two hands and you start rubbing them together really fast. You know, so I rub their hands together here. What do you start feeling when you start rubbing your hands together? Heat. Yeah, and that heat is a product of that friction there. So, and again, you can do this and with anything. Like you can rub your hands or rub anything across any two things rubbing together, and there's going to be some friction there. And that friction is a force that is working to stop things, basically. And so, our object in motion would stay in motion, except for things like friction, things like air resistance. Have any of you made a harmonograph today? A harmonograph picture down on the exhibit floor? No? Nobody? Wow. Well, we have an exhibit down on the exhibit floor called a harmonograph. And the way that thing works is we have like a big table and there's a marker on it, and you push the table and the marker draws on the paper. And that thing works by relying on these inefficiencies that we're surrounded with all the time, things like friction, things like air resistance. Because with the harmonograph, if we were living in a perfect world and that was a perfectly efficient machine, you push that thing and it just draws the same line over and over and over again. But because of all these efficiencies, it slows down over time. Whoever said slows down, again, great phrasing, love that. And it makes these cool patterns because it loses energy over time to things like friction and gravity and air resistance. Let's bounce over to second law. Okay. So what I have the second law written as up here is F equals M times A. Does anyone know what any of those letters stands for? F equals MA? Force equals mass times acceleration. All right, we know what the letters stand for. Now we gotta talk about what those words mean. And I've talked about mass a little bit already. We talked about mass when we were talking about the Earth and the Sun and all that. And so basically mass is the amount of stuff in a thing. For our purposes, we'll basically say it's the same thing as weight, but just know that like mass and weight aren't exactly the same thing. Acceleration you can kind of think of as how fast something is going. And so the amount of force something generates is equal to basically how big it is times how fast it's going. And I mean, we can think of this in kind of an everyday context too. How about, say that I was running at you and I ran into you at 10 miles an hour. It's not going to feel great, but you're probably going to be okay if I hit you at 10 miles an hour. Now imagine a truck hits you at 10 miles an hour. The truck's going to exert a lot more force. You're going to feel a lot more force from that truck hitting you than you do from me hitting you. Similarly, you're going to feel a lot more force from a truck hitting you at 50 miles an hour than you are a truck hitting you at 10 miles an hour. So the force is equal to mass, so in this case our two variables were me as the smaller mass, or the truck as the bigger mass, or acceleration, 10 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour. Truck moving at 50 generates a lot more force than me moving at 10. Pretty simple stuff that you intuitively kind of know, but maybe never thought of in like this exact like scientific context. And for the third one is an interesting one. You'll hear this told a lot of times as for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so this one gets really weird and complicated because you think of it even like with gravity. Gravity pulls you down at a static rate. And so an example of this would be like, again, if you want to get really abstract, I'm being pulled down towards the center of the Earth by gravity. And I'm not falling to the center of the Earth, which means there has to be some force pushing me up at least the rate that I am being pulled down by gravity. So the floor has to be resisting at the same rate that I am being pulled down. Because if it was pushing up more, I'd be floating up into the sky. And if it was pushing down less, I'd be sinking down into the floor. Another really easy way to illustrate this, my hand hurts. The table felt that force. My hand also felt that same force. My ball ran away from me. If anyone finds that, run it back up here. There we go. Thank you. All right. So those are kind of the three basic laws. And I think we'll do a couple little illustrative things. We'll think about how those laws and how these concepts that we're talking about are shown with them. So what I have here is what we call an arrow prop. And you can buy these in the stores. You sell them for $2 down in the gift shop. And what does this remind you of immediately? What do you think this is kind of like that you maybe have seen before? It's like a propeller. It's like a helicopter, basically. And so the way these work is you got to spin them. And when you spin them, they'll fly, basically, just like a helicopter would. And so I'm going to do that. Oops. It did fly. Ran into the ceiling, but it did fly. Now let's think about why. Let's think about how. So in order for something to raise, there has to be force that is pushing it upwards. We have to establish lift somehow or another. And how do we think we do that? Maybe we can get a little bit closer look at our propeller here. We notice anything in particular about kind of the shape of our propeller? Run it past the camera here. I'll run it past the crowd over here. Anything interesting about that? Here, you want to try spinning it? There we go. You can do it. See if our crowd back here. Can you get this to work? Can you give it a shot? So get one big push. But slow it down at the very least. Yeah, you can give it a shot. And while we're doing this, again, let's take a look at what this propeller looks like. Ooh, so you might have stumbled upon something here with that one. Smooth motion. Aha. And I want to stop and talk about what just happened there. Alright? So, something interesting happened when she tried this, where for everyone else who did it, they did this, and it flew up, or at least slowed down its descent. But when you did it, something else happened. It went down faster than it went up. So it went down faster than it would if I just dropped it, even. Why do you think that happened? I mean, yeah, it's the way you did it is a great general purpose answer there. Specifically, we're going to talk about the direction you spun it. You went left hand forward, which I'll demonstrate here. If you go right hand forward, it flies. And again, why? And so I'm being very particular, showing how the angles on the propeller are. There you go. You notice they're kind of at an angle here. And so when you spin it with your right hand forward, what happens is the air is coming and it's hitting the propeller at the high point here, and the propeller pushes the air downwards. And so what happens is, for every action you have an equal and opposite reaction. As much force as you're pushing downwards, you're also getting pushed upwards. And similarly, the other way works too. So if you spin it the other way, you can see it's hitting at the low end and getting pushed up, and so the propeller itself gets pushed down. And so, one thing to be careful of with these, and I always tell people this when they're playing with them in the gift shop too, make sure you do your right hand forward on these. I've genuinely drawn blood with these on myself demonstrating this. But yeah, and that's the same way that like a helicopter works as well, like we were just talking about. Basically same exact shape of a blade doing the exact same thing. Just a lot more rotations per minute lifting a much bigger object. Alright, how about, let's go back a little bit and talk about gravity, because gravity is another one of these things that Isaac Newton is very much associated with. Isaac Newton kind of is the guy who's describing this, not being credited with like discovering gravity, which is a stupid idea in my opinion. Everyone has known about gravity forever. It's just he's the guy who gets all the credit for it. And gravity is a force that is a constant. It acts the exact same on every single object on Earth. It's getting pulled down by gravity with the exact same amount of force all the time. What that means is that you can take any two objects and drop them, and they're going to be exposed to the same amount of force. And so what do we expect would happen if I take this sheet of paper and this metal ball and drop them? The metal ball is going to go down faster. Any other hypotheses out there? I'm going to take my mask off, by the way. I'm vaccinated, so. Any other ideas?
They'll hit at the same time.
They'll hit at the same time, I'm hearing. Which would make sense. As I described this, they're both getting exposed to the same amount of gravity, same force. So if I let them go at the same time, they should fall and hit at the same rate. But they don't. The ball hit quite a ways before. Why?
Because the ball was round and the paper was flat, and it's sort of like that. There was something else pushing up on it.
She said because the ball is round and the piece of paper is flat and there's something else pushing up on it. You're raising your hand in the back there?
The ball has more mass.
The ball does have more mass than the paper. You're right. And that is important here. Because there is a little bit of an extra thing to tack on here. And again, we're going into our kind of first law type of thing here. Objects in motion stay in motion, objects at rest stay at rest unless acted on by an outside force. if I were to do this on the moon, the result I described would happen. The paper and the ball would fall at the same rate. But we're not on the moon. We're on Earth, and we are surrounded by stuff all the time. We're breathing it in. There's air here. There's stuff floating around in the air. And so you're kind of onto something there, too, with your shape idea. This really big, broad, kind of light, less massive piece of paper, as it's falling, it's bumping into all these little particles in the air, and as it's bumping into them, it's basically experiencing friction, basically. It's getting slowed down on its descent by all the stuff it's bumping into in the air. And because it's light and has this big surface area, it bumps into a lot more stuff and gets a lot more affected by it. Second law of motion. Than our little dense, heavy ball does. A little bit more mass, a little bit less surface area to have to worry about it. And like I said, it ends up falling a lot faster because of it. Now, I have, over on my left here, a little experiment set up that I have 2 of these metal balls. And I have one of them on this side, and I have one of them on this side, and I have a little white switch here. And what's going to happen when I flick that white switch is this ball is going to drop straight down. This ball is going to shoot off that way. So, question is, which one of those balls is going to hit the ground first? One's going to fall straight down, one's going to go over there and hit the ground over there someplace. You think the one that's falling straight down is going to hit the ground first? No? That one? That one's going to hit first? Okay. Any other ideas? What do you think? Got any ideas? Which ball is going to hit the ground first?
The one that flies to the side because it goes really fast and then it will hit the ground.
So she said she thinks, just like you thought, the one that is going to be flying off this way is going to hit the ground first because it's got that little extra force behind it from the thing pushing it. I like that idea.
Because normally when you try to look at something that's like moving really fast, it like happens in a second.
You're catching on to something here too that I think is going to help us when we're actually trying to decide here, was that it's hard to keep track of these things visually. So a lot of times the best way to tell the answer to this one is by listening for him hitting the ground. So we have 2 people, we have 2 guesses so far, and both of you think that this one, the one that's going to shoot off to the side, is going to hit the ground first. And I'm not hearing any other hypotheses, so I think we're just going to give it a shot. And so, like I said, the one on my left is going to hit the ground, is going to fall straight down. The one on the right is going to shoot off that way before it hits the ground. And remember, like I said, let's listen for the 2 noises. So let's be very quiet. What do we think?
This one.
Did we hear a difference in when those 2 landed?
It actually sounded like the same.
It sounded an awful lot like the same time, didn't it? Let's try that again. Science demands repetition, demands replicability. Do the experiment again, just to make sure. So you said you thought it still sounded like the one that you thought was going to hit first, and you said it sounded like the same time. Let's do it again. Same time. Exactly. Thank you. So both the balls hit at the same time, or pretty close to it at least. And so, why that happens is, yeah, and so even though this one is moving a lot further, even though this one has force pushing it that way, the force that's pushing it that way has nothing to do with the force that's pushing it this way. It's falling down at the same rate, even if there's a force pushing it that way too. I mean, you could do this, you could fire a bullet out of a gun and it's still going to hit the ground at the same time as a ball we just drop out of our hand if you time it just right. So, interesting little thing there. And this is a situation where we have 2 objects that are the same material, same mass, being exposed to the same forces, and we get the same result. It's second law again, except everything's secretly kind of the same this time. But here, you can actually try it with, I have a little bit bigger ball, so we tried it with a little ball, these 2 little balls before. Let's try with a little bit bigger ball, and then that same ball that we had before. So the ball that's falling now is a little bit smaller than the ball that is getting shot off that way. Do we think that's going to make a difference? What do we think? We know that the 2 balls that are the same size fall at the same rate. Do we think a bigger ball is going to fall faster, slower, or is it going to be the same again? Think it's going to be the same? What do we think over here? A collective from the crowd. I like it. Yep. Same again. Good job. Thank you. So, in this case, it ends up being kind of the density that's more important than just like the raw mass of the thing. So the density is basically how heavy a thing is versus how much space it takes up. And so because they're of the same density, they fall through the air at about the same rate. If you really wanted to get into like the technicals of it, you could find that this one would fall slightly faster, but at the scale we're doing at, we're not going to hear a difference. But probably is technically true that this would fall a little bit faster. All right. Now, I have in front of me this guy, and I think I'm going to have my camera person back up here. And now I want to talk a little bit about levers. And levers are an interesting thing, maybe something I know you all have run into before. And I have a few different types of levers that I've drawn up on the board here that the camera probably can't see, but we'll talk a little bit about them. Conveniently, like we have 3 laws of gravity here from Newton, we also have 3 different classes of lever here. And you can see I've drawn them. So I think the first one we're going to talk about is probably the lever that most of you are most familiar with, first class lever. And so, I think what I'll do is, can I get 2 volunteers up here? Any 2. You're up, you're up. Alright. So I want you to stand right here and hold on to this like this, okay? So stand on top of the metal bar. And now, what I want you to do is I want you to push down on this. And when she pushes down on this, there's going to be some force that you're probably going to feel over there that's going to be lifting you upwards. So hold on tight. So push down. That's all you got. Not quite working. So we have our lever here. And I'll say there's some parts that are a little bit mobile here. So you pushing down isn't working to lift him up. But can you think of what we might be able to do to make this work, where when you push down on that, he'll lift up? You get an idea? Yeah, we can move the fulcrum. So the fulcrum, when we're talking about a lever, is the thing that kind of doesn't move. I'm going to lift this up a smidge here. You want us to slide that way? I'm going to push. Okay, hold back. Sit in there. Alright, so we've moved our fulcrum further down this way. Now I'll give it a push. Hold on tight over there. And he's lifting off the ground, huh? Come down slow. Good job. Alright, here. You want to be on that end? You want to go on that end? Alright, give it a shot. And up she goes. And down she goes. There you go. Alright, challenge for you. How about you 2 both go on this end? Or just you, that works too. Now do we think, I'm quite a bit bigger than she is, do we think she's going to be able to move me? No, not quite. Maybe if you both go. No, still not quite. But we saw with our experiment, what we could do is we could move our fulcrum and change a little bit about that. So why don't you, I'll let you down slow here. So how about we take our fulcrum and we slide it. Which way are we gonna have to slide it to make this work for me? Towards me. Alright. I'll give it a shot. Oop, there I go. So that's a first class lever. Like I said, that's one, like when we think of a lever, that's kind of the first thing we think of. It's, a teeter-totter, basically. You push down on one side, the other side goes up, and you can change how efficient it is by where you put the fulcrum, how much force you need to move the load on the other side. But there's a couple different types of levers, ones we don't necessarily always think about. Second class lever, actually in a pretty good spot kind of to illustrate second class lever here. We'll slide this all the way to the other end. Sit in there. We're going to put it all the way on the other end. Right. Can I get one more volunteer here? We'll let you go. You haven't gone yet. All right. Second class lever. Second class lever is a little different. With our first class lever, the fulcrum's in the middle. Our force is on one end. Our force is on one end. Our load is on the other end. Second class lever, our load that we're trying to move is in the middle. So we have a fulcrum on one end. We have a force on one end. I'll be the load. And so, my pliers are in my pocket. What you're going to want to do is lift me, basically. There you go. Now, can you lift 190 pounds normally? Probably not, huh? Yeah, you want to try? Here, we'll scooch down a little bit for you. There you go. You got me off the ground there. Wasn't a huge distance, but you got me. Yeah, you want to try? Go for it. So can we think of any examples from real life that are this type of lever, where you lift on one end to lift something in the middle with a fulcrum on the far end? Examples. What was that? Ramps. So ramps are kind of a different type of machine. Have any of you ever used a wheelbarrow before? So a wheelbarrow is a great example of this, where the wheel is the fulcrum, you're the load on that end, and whatever you're carrying in your wheelbarrow is me in that scenario.
Or a pile of logs.
What was that?
A pile of logs.
Pile of logs, there you go. And so, third class lever, again a tricky one that we don't always necessarily think about, and one that is really, really hard to illustrate with this. Because the way a third class lever works is we got to put our fulcrum way on this side. And right up against the end there. And then we got to put our force in the middle, and the load we're trying to pick up is over here. And so this is kind of tricky, and like I said, not something that necessarily illustrates really well with this particular thing. But a third class lever, you have a force in the middle. Like I said, you have your fulcrum on that side, and you're trying to lift a load on this side. And so this one's probably not going to work very efficiently for us, because what it would require basically is somebody trying to lift me up from the middle there. Probably not going to happen with this setup. But it is something that does come up on occasion. So the most common example, the kind of one you usually see in a textbook, is a hammer. And so with the hammer, fulcrum, bottom part of the hammer, the force, your hand, the load, the end of the hammer. I swing this more or less stays in place. The force is coming from my hand, and the load we're moving around is the end of the hammer to whack a nail. Another great one that some of you are probably pretty familiar with, fishing rod would be another example of a third class lever, where you have the end of the fishing rod that you're holding in place, you have your fish on the end, and you pull from the middle to bring it in. Weird one that's kind of niche and you don't see a whole lot. Actually, I'm digging in my pockets here. Tweezers, another third class lever. Force is in the middle. Let's see. Oh, I got one more thing to do here. Kind of forgot this one, so we're going to be going back, but it's a fun activity. So, how about you hop up here? We'll do you two in a little bit. Okay. Actually, here, you go on this side, and you'll be on that skateboard. Scoot this out of the way. And you two both just sit on those skateboards. It's right on your back. Now, sit down on it, feet up off the ground. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand a rope to both of you. One side of the rope, you get the other side of the rope. I'm going to give a little slack over here. There we go. Okay. So then just reel up the slack on either side. Don't start pulling on each other, but just reel up all the slack, okay? So we want it to be kind of tight between you, okay? Like that. Okay, and so when I tell you in a second here, what I want you guys to do, nope, I'm already working on it. Here. Don't start reeling yet. What I'm going to want you to do is start reeling in that slack on that rope. And what I want the rest of our audience, and you guys can guess too, what I want the rest of our audience to do is guess what's going to happen when they start pulling in that rope. What was that? They're going to start getting closer to each other, so we think they're both going to move. Yes, we think they're both going to move. All right, and so why don't we start just reeling it in? Don't start yanking on it, but just gently roll it in. And you're right, they both did move. Now, let's swap somebody out here. Why don't you hop out and you hop in. Whoa. All right. Now I'm going to have you do the same experiment. And again, what do we think is going to happen? Do you think they're going to move closer together again?
Yeah.
All right, let's try it. Start reeling the thread in. And she moved a little bit, but she moved a lot more. What concept did we talk about here? And what's different between you two? That might have been the reason why something changed here.
I think the better person moves and moves.
Yeah, the lighter person ends up moving more. And so you're heavier than he is. You have more mass than he does. You have more mass than she does. So it's harder to get you moving than it is to get either of these two moving. So these two are pretty close. So when they pull on each other, they both move. But when she over there pulls on you, you don't move a whole lot because, like I said, it takes a little bit more force to get you moving. And we can do the same if we, if we tagged out here. If I hopped in on this side, here, let's jump out. If I hopped in, do we think we're going to see a difference here? Huh? Hopefully I don't fall off. All right. I must weigh more than you do. Because you did a lot more movement than I did that time. And so, again, second law, force equals mass times acceleration. It takes more force to get an object of larger mass moving than it does an object of smaller mass. All other things even. All right, that's been a long show, actually. Quite longer than I thought we were going to go. Thank you all for sticking with me. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all online for watching, too. So, like I said, love having a live audience for these things, especially a demo like this. It always helps to have volunteers to hop in. Yeah, and so we were live on Facebook, so facebook.com/HeadwatersScienceCTR, youtube.com/HeadwatersScienceCenter, and twitch.tv/HeadwatersScienceCenter. There'll be videos available on all of those. And so, shout outs to those platforms that people are watching on there. Also, shout outs to Beltrami Electric Co-op. They've been underwriting these programs for us for a while. And also, just to note that our schedule relatively recently has changed here at the Science Center. So we were closed 3 days a week for most of COVID times, but we're now open 7 days a week. So we're open Monday through Saturday from 9:30 to 5, and now Sunday.